This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the De Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I help pediatric therapists and educators become better leaders so they can make a bigger impact with their services. With over 15 years of experience supporting school-age kids with diverse learning needs, I'll share up-to-date evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help clinicians, teachers, and aspiring school leaders feel more confident in the way they serve their students and clients. I'll cover a range of topics designed to help you support students' emotional and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood, including how to support language, literacy, executive functioning, as well as how to help IEP teams working together to support kids across the day. Whether you want to learn more effective strategies for your therapy sessions or classroom, be a more influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered. Hey there, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 126 of the De Facto Leaders podcast. Many clinicians start their careers feeling unprepared to navigate the job market and the job search process. And in a lot of professional groups, I've noticed skepticism towards contract companies, recruiters, and staffing agencies simply because many people working in school settings don't know who they can trust. If you've ever had a recruiter awkwardly slide into your DMs or advertise in your online group without permission, you might be feeling some of that skepticism yourself. And there is truly an art and a science to navigating career placements, as well as job searching and working with recruiters and staffing agencies. And having this skill set can be a game changer when it comes to finding fulfilling work and finding a good position where you are respected and treated well. And recruiters can be a huge asset if you know how to work with them and if you can spot a good one. That's why I invited Ryan Cleaveland to the show to give you a peek behind the curtain of the staffing and recruiting industry. Ryan is the CEO of Spotter Staffing, a company that helps connect schools with highly qualified therapists and special ed teachers. After over 20 years in corporate staffing across multiple industries, he started Spotter Staffing with his best friend, Ryan Allen, who is the COO. They wanted to provide staffing for an ethical and selfless industry, so that's what inspired them to focus on connecting special ed professionals with school districts. In this conversation, we discuss how staffing and recruiting actually works. What are the different types of contracts and employment options? How can you tell if you're working with a qualified recruiter? And how do you advocate for yourself during the hiring process? What are the benefits of working with a recruiter who has also been a therapist? And are there benefits to working with a recruiter or a job coach who doesn't have a clinical background and maybe offers a different perspective? And then finally, we wrap up by talking about how to avoid the grass is greener kind of thinking when approaching your career and how to weigh the benefits and drawbacks of being an employee versus a contractor versus self-employed, and how you can find an ideal setup that works for your career and your life. And also, we get into a conversation about how what works for you might change at different stages of your career. Before we get going, I wanted to talk quickly about how this conversation and this topic ties into some of my program offerings and why I have set up my support the way that I have. So, the School of Clinical Leadership is my program who helps school clinicians take the executive functioning lead in their building so that they can take on the role of being the executive functioning coach for their IEP team. This is so important because a lot of times you almost have to designate yourself as this person, and there is a way to do that if you have the right system. Now, I'm going to be completely transparent with you about the process and kind of the journey that I had in creating this program. I initially had my suite of language therapy courses where I'm helping SLPs and other professional supporting literacy with language therapy. And when I wanted to create an additional program, I did so because I found that clinicians needed support above and beyond focusing on what they were doing in therapy as it applied to supporting language and literacy. And that is so many other things. So the initial support that I came up with was what I like to call random thoughts with Karen. It was kind of like, I'm going to help you with everything else about your job besides language therapy. And you might find this shocking. A lot of people found that very confusing because nobody actually knew what the program was about. Really, what I wanted it to be about was leadership and career development, but that topic can include so many different things that I think that it was sometimes difficult for people to know what to do with it. But the thing is that there's so many things about being a clinician that you have to think about to be happy and fulfilled in your career. But I've also found that clinicians are pretty utilitarian sometimes, meaning that they want to know specifically what they're going to get out of a program, and they're very tactical and practical. And because there are so many different factors to thinking about how we can find fulfilling work as clinicians, I found that it's beneficial to focus on one key area that people can focus on. And that's why the School of Clinical Leadership is about supporting executive functioning, because this is something that you as a school clinician can get behind, that can be an initiative that you can focus on, that can give you some clarity on how you can really make a difference in the work that you do and show up as a leader in your building. Now, I say this because originally what I wanted the program to be about was leadership, which it still is. It's just that I make it about executive functioning because, number one, this is such an important area, but number two, because I want you to have clarity on what you're actually doing and your first steps. But there's so much more to it than that. And the things that you're going to be doing when you're thinking about putting executive functioning support in place and thinking about training other people in your building are also going to help you with your career search. And they're also going to help you build some skills that will be beneficial for you if you want to get better at the job search process, because part of putting that kind of support in your building is about building relationships, and working with recruiters and knowing how to sell yourself and talk about yourself is something that's going to help you be seen as a leader in your building when it comes to being the executive functioning coach, but is also something that can set you up for success if you want to think about the next stage of your career, if you want to think about being self-employed, offering services as a private practitioner or other courses like what I do. So I say that because the School of Clinical Leadership is about executive functioning, but it's about much more than that. So I just want to invite you to think about that as you listen to this conversation. To learn more about the School of Clinical Leadership, you're going to want to go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership to learn how to become a member. Now, please enjoy this conversation with Ryan Cleaveland. Today, I am joined by Ryan Cleaveland from Spotter Staffing. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Karen.
So you have a really interesting background, and I thought we could just start off by having you share a little bit about yourself, what you do now, as well as what led you to what you're currently doing.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying it's interesting. I hope everyone else feels that way. As Karen mentioned, my name is Ryan Cleveland. I'm with Spotter Staffing. I am, for all intents and purposes, I'm a recruiter. I've been in staffing for the last 20 years. Went to school for something completely different. Actually went to Illinois State, which I think where you went, Karen.
Yep.
Yeah, I was very intent on being in finance, actually finance and insurance, and quickly learned after graduation that was not the career path for me, and kind of fell into staffing, fell into recruiting and staffing. Didn't know much about it. Had a friend that was in it, and then for those that know Illinois State, I went to the job fair at Bone Student Center and met a couple folks, and been in staffing since. Worked for a pretty large organization for about 15 years, and then made the decision to step away and start Spotter with my business partner, Ryan Allen.
So when you're talking about recruiting, can you just give kind of a high level explanation of what your job is when you're a recruiter?
Yeah. So we work specifically with schools and with therapists, and we help individuals find positions, either short term or long term, with schools, with K-12 schools. So SLPs, OTs, PTs. Our job is to help folks that are in that space find a career path that fits them, and help schools find great teammates that can help the kids.
So really, when you're a recruiter, the main job is that you have some kind of a partnership with an organization that needs to find staff. And then you're also working with the people who are looking for the jobs, and just, you're kind of this person who connects the two people.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, we spend our time every day talking with folks that are in a clinician role, that are in related services or want to be in related services, while we spend time working with directors, assistant directors, assistant superintendents, individuals in schools that are looking to hire talent, looking to hire individuals that want to be a part of a related services team. So we're a connector. So we help kind of mirror the two together, help individuals find opportunities to broaden their career, expand their career, achieve their personal professional goals, and ultimately serve the kids and make sure they get what they need.
Yeah. So really, you are just, I mean, it's a very specific area of recruiting, because you are finding people who need to be in that role in K-12 education. And I know that recruiting can be, it can be for tech companies, it can be corporate, it can really be for any industry, right?
Yep. Yeah, it can. I actually spent most of my career, I spent my entire career outside of Spotter in other industries. So it's my first 15 years, I had nothing to do with schools. I'm not a therapist. Never worked in a school. Actually don't have a lot of family members that work in schools. I spent most of my time in engineering, architecture, construction, manufacturing. So lots of different industries. But you're right. It's school staffing is not the only industry, and staffing in general, recruiting in general, has become so much larger over the last 20 years. When I was in school, graduating, the term temp was very common. And when I thought about staffing, or I thought about temp work, that was the person that went into the office and maybe worked somewhere for a day or two to help out. And it has evolved to really outsourced recruiting, outsourced staffing. So it's definitely changed over the years.
I think most people in this generation think Ryan from The Office, like, I mean, that's what we think of when we think of temp. It's like I would say not necessarily a revered position, the way that they presented it, which I know that a lot of times it feels, I remember when I was in the first couple of years of my career, and I did have an SLP role, but I had a lot of friends who were temping, and it was like, they definitely thought of it differently than the permanent, being a permanent employee somewhere.
Yeah, I hope that's changed. I hope that's changing. Part of our goal is to change that. We care a lot about folks that are on our team, that are recruiters, that are working with schools. We care equally as much about those that are working in the schools themselves. And so I hope that's something that is changing. I believe it is, but that's, one of our goals is to change that mentality.
Yeah. So as we were kind of talking earlier before we started recording about how there's a certain perception about recruiters and working with different contract companies versus working for a district. And a lot of times now, especially now that we are online and everybody's online, and you get all these cold emails and people reaching out to you. And it used to be where if somebody sent you a message, it didn't feel weird and intrusive, but now it's just people are getting so many messages, and then there's this skepticism about recruiters, agencies, especially within a lot of the professional groups. I know a lot of them, it's like they don't want people going in there and posting job posts and things like that. And I do think that the way that you approach situations depends on the reception that you get.
Yep.
But I also think that people don't really understand what recruiting is, what the benefit is for you versus the district. So can you kind of explain, if you're a recruiter, like how do you make money and what's the financial interest for you versus the person who is seeking the job versus the district and the person who's hiring? Like, how does it all work and what's usually the setup?
You want to know behind the scenes, behind the curtain?
Yeah. And again, like I said, I think that sometimes people just don't understand it. So it's like, what's going on here,
Yeah. Can I, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear, if you have a perception of staffing, what that might be, or at least what you've heard. Would you mind if I asked you, what have you heard? What's your perception of staffing?
So I think that it depends on whether it is, and I've done a lot with job searching and networking. So I have had the opportunity to kind of see like what's the difference between a recruiter versus a staffing company and things like that. And I know that there's different setups. And I know that you really have to ask questions about what the arrangement is and who you're working for. And is this something where someone's placing you in a position and then they're out versus you're working for the company instead of the district? Like, what's the setup? But I know that not everybody asks those questions just because they maybe haven't been at it as long as I have. Yeah. So I do think that there is a little bit of skepticism with knowing how to negotiate rates, knowing what a fair or reasonable competitive rate is. So there is this kind of like, how do I advocate for myself? Yeah. And can I trust this person to advocate for me? Yeah. So those are kind of the questions that people aren't really sure if they know the answers to.
Yeah. I enjoy hearing people's perspective, and it's not always good, right? Sometimes people are skeptical of staffing. Sometimes people have had a bad experience with staffing. Spotter originally wasn't intended on being a school-based staffing company. As I mentioned earlier, my background is not in schools. It's not in school staffing. It was intended on being a more technically based organization, engineering or something in that capacity, because that's what I experienced it. I was fortunate enough to be out with a few friends, and one of our friends, his wife is an occupational therapist. And, in talking with, a group of individuals I was with, I said, hey, this is kind of my intentions, this is what I'm going to do. And she had made a comment. She said, how come you don't ever think about us? And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, how come you don't ever think about, OTs or SLPs or schools? I said, well, I didn't really know it was a thing. And so I found myself talking with her, and then all of a sudden meeting all of these speech pathologists and occupational therapists. And the reason I asked you that question is because I had usually two questions that I tended to go into the conversation with. One is, how did you end up in this space? Why do you do what you do? And what's your experience with staffing? And more often than not, when I would ask those questions, and again, hopefully this is something that's changing, it's our goal, but it was usually negative. There was a lot of non-compete agreements and buyout clauses and things that just really seemed to not advocate for the individual. You used that word earlier. Things that didn't set the individual up for success necessarily. Things that didn't allow the schools to build the teams they wanted to, and ultimately had this impact on kids. So the people and then those obstacles is what drew us into school-based staffing and being able to work with folks like yourself, frankly. Behind the scenes, it's a really good question. And I think folks should be skeptical, but I don't think that they should be skeptical of just recruiters in staffing companies. You mentioned that you've done a lot of job searching, a lot of networking, a lot of time. You spent a lot of time in that space. I think there should be a level of skepticism that folks have, regardless of the individuals that they're meeting, regardless of the setting that they're going into, regardless of the person that might be hiring them. Hopefully, there's a level of trust that you can form in those conversations. But I think it's it's important for people to do their due diligence, to do their homework, to ask questions, to form a relationship or not, and understand if that person is the right person for them to be working with. On the back end, you said you kind of wanted to know back end. And so, certainly if you want me to expand on anything, let me know. But, we're recruiters. So we spend our time building relationships with folks. And, I guess when I talk, I'm talking in terms of myself. I'm talking in terms of Spotter. I've worked for two organizations, Spotter and my former organization. So it's difficult. I can maybe share some perspective, but I don't know if I can speak for other organizations.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we spend our time networking, building relationships with folks. I've never worked with you, Karen, but when you were working in a school, you spent your time serving those kids, would be my guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe you had a few other responsibilities in here and there, but that was your core day. Our core day is twofold: getting to know individuals that want to work in that space, understanding their personal and professional goals, helping them understand how we can help them. And then the other half of it is spending time with the schools. So for us in particular, we put a high value on information. The more we can understand the culture of an organization, what it's like in the environment, the team makeup, the day-to-day responsibilities. So we spend a lot of time building relationships, and that's that connector word that you used earlier. That's what helps us. So, the phone calls, the emails, the LinkedIn messages, the text messages. I think things have evolved over time. When I started in staffing, we were still posting jobs in newspapers. We were putting flyers out on the side of the roads. You don't see that as much. Not as many folks are getting the Chicago Tribune or whatever it might be and going through classifieds. So I think there's a little bit like got to figure out what's the best avenue. And I think a lot of times recruiters default to volume. The more messages I send out, the more emails I deliver, the more calls I make, the more relationships I can create. And, there's some validity to that. If you want to build relationships with folks, if you don't ever pick up the phone, if you don't ever send an email, the likelihood of you making a connection goes down. So I think that's probably why a lot of times individuals are seeing so many messages. But hopefully there's a connection point, either through somebody like yourself or a professor or an association, whatever it might be, that's bridging the gap so that those relationships can form a little more organically. So
and so usually the way that it works is, and the different things that I have seen as a job seeker are where, and I think this is how you are set up, is when you are working with the professional and then you have a contract with a school but they're actually an employee of Spotter. Is that how your setup is?
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways staffing organizations are going to operate. The probably three most traditional is Spotter. We're a W-2 company. So all individuals working for Spotter are employed through Spotter. So we provide health benefits, continuing education opportunities, professional allowances, paid time off. We provide professional liability insurance. So all those things. So you're a W-2 employee of Spotter. There's 1099. Some organizations operate with individuals truly operating as contract 1099 independent employees, which means you're going to have to cover your own insurance. You're probably not going to receive benefits. That stuff's kind of all on you. And then there are some organizations out there in school staffing. It doesn't seem to be as common I would say, generally speaking, from my experience, in any setting where a speech path may go, or an OT may go, or a PT may go, direct placement isn't as common. But sometimes you'll hear that phrase where an organization would call us and say, can you find us somebody for this role? We want to hire them through Spotter immediately. And they would never work for Spotter, or the organization would really just be that connector. But to your question, to your comment, Spotter's a W-2 employer. So everybody that works for Spotter is a W-2 employee.
Yeah. So it's like when you have that kind of a situation, it's just you're helping with the placement and then you're out kind of a thing, which I know that isn't how I have not seen that as well. I have seen it more with tech companies and corporate where they will just place the person and it's like the staffing company just gets paid for placing them and then they're out of the picture. And I have seen there's a couple other companies and I don't want to name names, but they will help you to find a job and they'll actually do some of the setting up interviews and coaching you, but then you have to pay them a percentage of your salary for like a year. And I was like, ooh, I don't know and it's like, some of them are like 10% of your salary where I was like, I mean, I understand how that seems enticing now where it's like, oh, it would be so nice to just have a guarantee, but then you're on the hook for that. So
who am I to say that's not a good opportunity? I have not spoken with them. I don't know the positions they have. I don't know what could create for somebody. However, from my experience, if you're having to pay into something in order to receive a job, it's probably not necessary. I'm sure I'm not the only one out there to hear how highly in demand a speech language pathologist is in this world right now. You're having to front something or pay something in order to be a part of that. To me, it seems like there might be another possibility out there for you.
Yeah. And this company, and I don't know, it's, I think more for other, more techie kind of, other roles. I don't know if they do clinical roles, but yeah, I would think that you could do some of that networking and coaching on your own versus having to be on the hook for giving up a portion of your salary for a certain amount of time. So
yeah. A lot of times people want to know how staffing companies earn, or there's a concern about that. Like, I take a position through a staffing company, am I having to give up some wages?
Yeah.
And so the first thing I would say around that is if you're having to do that, then everyone's got their own goals, their own personal priorities. Again, who am I to say that you shouldn't consider that opportunity? But it's probably not necessary. Most of the time, you're going to find organizations like Spotter. Our premium, we're a for-profit company. Our premium is billed to the district or the school. So that should never be felt by the individual. Most of the time, individuals are actually going to make more working through an organization like ours than they would maybe through a district or a school itself. So, but definitely shouldn't be fronting money.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know that there's career coaches and things like that, and that's different. And I personally feel a little bit different about that because sometimes there's other elements of personal development and you kind of know what you're getting yourself into versus like having to promise some kind of ongoing thing. So I feel a little bit better about that kind of thing. But yeah, when it's your salary, it just feels different.
So finding a position is difficult and it can be stressful no matter where you're at in your career. I think it was up there with life events like a death and marriage. So, those are extreme things to think about. Looking for a job compares, what it compares to, and so finding resources to help you with that, regardless of what they are, I think are important, and something that helps you, whether it's anxiety or frustration, whatever it is that will help you achieve your goals and find you the place you want to, I think is important. Sometimes it might be a career coach, sometimes it might be a recruiter, sometimes it might be a friend. I go a little bit back and forth on some of the career coach things, resume, paid resume services. Because most times you can find resources that will help you with that for free. I regularly will get involved with universities and talk about things like resume building, talk about things like how to interview. We'll do one-on-ones, and that's stuff, whether it's someone like myself, an organization like ours, going to a career center at a university. There's so many free resources out there that I'm hard pressed to say somebody should go pay for that for those types of things. But if it makes you more comfortable in a tense situation, then it probably wouldn't be a horrible thing either. So
Yeah. I think like something like resume building, it's such an isolated skill and such a small
yeah,
part of the job search process that to me it seems like it could be a part of this big system that they're coaching you in and not the whole thing.
yeah,
I actually have been talking with a talent acquisition person who works for the Illinois government, and he said that he's worked with people who have paid a lot of money for people to help them with their resume, and he's like, they're not good. But government jobs are different because he
yeah,
told me that with, I've been working since 2004. And so he's like, you should have a 6-page resume. And the resume people are like, condense it and do only 3 bullet points. And he's like, there's no way you're going to communicate your whole job experience here. And so I think that sometimes if the person who's the resume writer doesn't understand the industry that you're in and they
Mhm.
pretend like they do or they think that they do, it doesn't apply to your situation. So I think getting somebody that understands your industry and understands the system that you're applying into is really important. And I have found that you've got to be asking people, whether it's somebody selling career coaching, whether it's a recruiter, whether it's you're going directly to the organization or talking to people who work there, you have to know how to ask the right questions, because it really doesn't matter, because like it's you always have to be advocating for yourself regardless of who the person is that you're talking to.
Yeah, I'd agree. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about resume writing, and we were talking about the stress that goes into resume writing and the amount of time that people spend
Mm-hmm.
writing resumes. And it often tends to be very significant. People are spending
Mm-hmm.
hours upon hours looking at a resume, reviewing it, editing it, changing it around. And I think you should have a good resume. I think resumes are important, but they're a tool to get you in front of somebody, in my opinion. And at that point, it's an opportunity for you to share your experiences and sell yourself and advocate for yourself. And where people spend a great deal of time on resumes, oftentimes they don't spend as much time building a network, connecting
Mm-hmm.
relationships, and you've been around this world for a little while, like I have. If you see somebody's name come across that uh,
Yep.
there's a better chance, especially if you know that person in a positive way, there's a better chance you're going to reach out to them, regardless of what it says on the paper.
Mm-hmm.
There's a connection there. And so oftentimes when I'm talking about resumes with folks or I'm helping them build resumes, like how do we get things on the paper that are pertinent to what you're trying to accomplish? And then how do we make sure you get some connections with folks in a way that's going to get you the position you want, get you the attention that you want, versus stressing over resume writing. And people spend so much time. I think the Google average right now that people look at a resume is like 6 or 8 seconds.
Yep.
So
It's I've heard even less.
they
It's
spend hours freaking
yeah.
out over a resume, and then people don't read it. It can be it can be stressful.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly can. It seems like it's one of those things that you want to get it done and you want to have it for when somebody asks for it, but it's not a super huge ROI to be spending all of your time. And I
Yeah.
think that the people who do know how to coach people are focusing more on networking and helping you with your interviewing skills and
Yep.
negotiating and knowing how to ask the right questions and
Yep.
those kinds of things.
Exactly. Yeah, you got it.
So I had another question about the, let's see, which direction do I want to go in next? There's so many different places we can go here.
Yeah.
Um, when people are, if since you are specifically focused on clinical roles, I have had some really interesting experiences working with recruiters. Just, I talked to one person at one company and I remember being like, where do I sign on the dotted line? Like he was so good at selling me and he knew all this information. And I just felt, like the conversation went really well. And then I've talked to other people where I'm like, are they reading off a piece of paper? Like,
Yeah.
where you just feel, I feel like they don't really know what they're doing, or they are just, again, kind of reading off their operating procedures, and they don't really understand the process. Like, and it was a very different feeling. And so I am curious, what things should people be asking when they're trying to figure out, is this role right for me? And I know that you specifically are focusing on Illinois and Texas. So obviously they can, if people are interested in roles in Illinois and Texas, they can obviously talk to you. But just in general, when we're thinking about navigating the job search process, what should clinicians be asking when they're in that position?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, that individual that you spoke to, that it felt like they were reading off a script or a piece of paper. I hate to say it because I've been staffing for 20 years, but they might have been doing that.
Yeah.
It's very likely they could have been doing that. And like recruiting, staffing, helping individuals find positions, like everything else, it's a skill. So you have some that are better than others. That individual that you said, hey, where's the dotted line? Where do I sign?
Yeah.
I don't know that person, but my guess is they probably spent a lot of time perfecting their craft, understanding what was important to individuals, understanding how to convey that information to folks, making sure that they asked good questions to understand the needs of the individuals so that they serve them. But it's a skill, and unfortunately, like every other industry in the world, there's people that are really good at it, and people that sometimes maybe are starting out, or maybe just aren't so good at it. So, questions to ask. I don't know if there's a perfect question, a silver bullet question. If you sat down with a recruiter that you say, hey, if you don't ask this question, you're going to miss out. But I think like any other job interview or any other opportunity that you're considering, I think you should ask questions about the position, about the company that you're going to be working for, about the individual that you're going to be working with. Are you going to be working with that individual that was reading off the paper solely, or is there somebody else that you're going to be talking to?
Yeah.
Do they know the details of the position? If they don't, that might be a red flag. Understanding what longer term opportunities look like. Stuff that you might normally ask in a regular job interview if you were at an outpatient clinic meeting with the owner, or if you were in a skilled nursing facility meeting with the shift manager. Same questions, you're just asking it to a recruiter at a staffing company. And when you sit down, Karen, with somebody and you feel uncomfortable, or maybe you feel like they don't have all the answers, and that you get that feeling in your stomach, or that kind of thought in your brain, you're like, something just doesn't seem right here. I think you should follow it. And I think that to be true no matter who you're meeting with. So, I don't know that I totally answered your question. I don't think there's a silver bullet answer for you. When you sit down with a staffing person, ask this question, but I think you should do due diligence and understand who you're going to be working with, why the organization is around, what the opportunity looks like, and who you'd be working with. And if you're going through lines of questioning with those topics, you probably will know whether or not it's an individual, an organization, a position that you can trust, it's going to serve you, or not. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Really silver bullet.
Well, yeah, no, I agree that you do have to practice and talk to people. And that's part of the networking, is that if you're just talking to people and asking them questions about their job, then you do feel more prepared when you get to an actual interview, or when you're talking to a recruiter. Like as a job seeker, it's so it creates so much anxiety to feel like I can't see this. I can't envision myself in this role. And so asking questions about, like, what does your day-to-day look like? Who am I reporting to? What does the team look like? Just to help you really be able to feel like you can see yourself in that position.
Yeah.
And something that actually that guy that I talked to, or that I thought was really good, he just told me some things where I was like, oh, I didn't even think to ask that, where he was like, here is our re-sign rate. Like if we sign people at a school district, here's the percentage of people that come back and stay around.
Sure.
And then the other thing he was talking about, like, this is how you're mentored and evaluated and those types of things. Because that's something that does come up a lot with clinicians just in their jobs, where not necessarily in the recruiting process, but where I see when I'm mentoring clinicians in some of my programs, where there can be some, some challenge and some conflict. Like my supervisor says I should do this. And sometimes they report to the principal, and sometimes they report to a special ed director or some other kind of administrator. So just knowing, how am I going to get support? How am I going to know if I'm meeting the requirements and those types of things? And the other thing that I know that with if you are in person or teletherapy, people want to know about that. And they also like to know about the administrative requirements, because that was another thing. He was like, people love this job because they hate the paperwork, and we help them focus on just the therapy and all this stuff. Like I said, he knew exactly what to say to make it
Sure.
sound amazing. And so he clearly had talked to a lot of clinicians to figure out what parts of their job do they hate doing, why do they actually do this, like you were saying, where it's, why do you want to be a clinician? Nobody's like, I want to be an SLP because I love writing IEPs all weekend and not being able to spend time with my family. Like
I
nobody
haven't
says
heard that
that.
one. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was something that where I was like, wow, he was really impressive, even though I know
Yeah.
I'm probably not even going to be working with that guy. And I
Yeah.
didn't end up going with that company just for other reasons, but yeah, it was really insightful, where I was like, okay, I feel like I know how to, I have some questions that I'm going to ask the next person that I talk to.
Yeah. I think, so when I meet a lot of people, and I probably asked you this question a few weeks ago when we were chatting, but, why did you get into the role you're in? Why are you in the career that you're in? Why are
Mhm.
you in the space that you're in? I think that goes both ways. And, recruiters that are committed to their craft will have an answer for you. And folks that maybe aren't, maybe are
Yeah.
taking the job as a job, they may not. And I think that question often gives a lot of perspective. Beyond that, though, to your point, being able to ask about things that are important to you, if you know that mentorship is critical to your success, asking that question. A good recruiter either will have an answer for you, or they'll be honest and let you know that they don't know the answer and that they're going to go find out for you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you've had other services that you've worked with outside of being a speech pathologist, whether it's a realtor or
Hmm.
whatever it might be. And in my opinion, the folks that are great don't always have every answer. They're educated, they've spent time understanding the folks that they're going to be working with, but they can also be transparent when they don't know something, and they
Hmm.
have a way of finding it out for you. So, I think understanding what's important to you and then being curious about it is what I would recommend and what I would do.
Yeah. So I know that you have mentioned that you do spend a lot of time trying to understand why people went into this role.
Yeah.
And I know that you do have people who work for you that have been in clinical roles. Can you share a little bit about Spotter and just the makeup, so that people can kind of understand how your team works and how you're able to really understand what the schools need, what the job seekers need, as well as just some of the other ins and outs of special ed and K-12 education?
Yeah, I can. I appreciate asking. So try not to give too roundabout of a response to you, but as I shared in the beginning, I fell into staffing. I didn't know what I wanted to do 3 years into college, and I got into finance because I thought that's what that was going to be the career path I wanted. And Illinois State at that time, you had to declare after 2 years,
Yep.
so it was kind of put under the gun, and so I chose finance and quickly realized it was not for me. And I fell into staffing. I was at that job fair I mentioned and was leaving, and had somebody stop me. And so it started my career in staffing. What I have learned over the years, working spotter, being a part of spotter, is that individuals that have a background like yours, typically they're not falling into it in the same method that I'm falling into.
Hmm.
I think it's part of the reason I enjoy working with therapists so much. There's usually an amazing story around why somebody became an SLP, why somebody wants to work at a skilled nursing facility or a school, or why somebody became a therapist. Um, and so, that really brought us into, man, we need to be working with these individuals, if for no other reason. It just gives us an opportunity to spend time with really great people. And
Hmm.
I know you've been self-employed, and from my vantage point, if I can just spend time with really great people every day, that in itself is a win.
Yeah.
uh, but we also, as I mentioned, we found that there was not always the best feedback about staffing companies, and there were some things, particularly in agreements, that didn't always serve the individual or the school or ultimately the kids. And so, we got into this to work with people, and then we found an opportunity to better serve the clinicians, to better serve the schools, better serve the kids. But my business partner and I, his name's Ryan also, we are not therapists, and so we don't know.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot in 4.5 years, but I also know that I'll never know as much as you do. And so, we started seeking out individuals that could help us learn. And I think the clinician community is a tighter one than other industries I've worked in. Unfortunately, it seems, from my vantage point, it's a community that really is willing to help folks learn, help folks see what it is that they do every day. So we have mentors that are therapists, that are lifelong clinicians on our team. Everybody has experience in staffing. So our recruiters, we were talking, none of them are entry level. Everyone's been in a staffing role for an extended period of time, whether it's recruiting or working with schools or whatever it might be. But several of the folks also have been clinicians or have worked in a school. And so we have individuals that were teachers, individuals that worked with special needs individuals in outpatient. I have a recruiter that she was a speech language pathologist, still is, but was a practicing speech language pathologist for 35 years before she got into staffing. So not only have they taught me a ton, but they also can bring a really great perspective. And we've continued to think about that. How do we continue to learn? How do we continue? The more we learn, the more we can support the school staff members on our team, but then we can offer them more resources. So we have uh, individuals we call clinical experts.
Hmm.
They are, 10, 15, 20 plus year individuals that have been a special ed teacher, been a speech language pathologist, have been an occupational therapist, and they act as interim advisors. And often we will get involved with um, our school staff if there's a question. So, I think knowledge is incredibly important. And if we want to serve the therapy community, if we want to serve the speech community, if we want to serve the schools, we need to understand more about what it's like. So, you know, we tend to look for folks that have been around staffing, but I think that having folks that have been clinicians, folks that have been in the seat, folks that have been writing IEPs off hours,
Hmm.
even
Yep.
though it may not be why they got into it, they're able to give perspective that I think is really important. So.
I want to take a quick break here and talk about the School of Clinical Leadership. The job search process is obviously part of the puzzle when it comes to finding a good career, but you also have to know how to navigate the building and know how to show up and be a good member of the team once you actually get hired. And part of doing that is obviously knowing how to communicate with your team, knowing how to do what you need to be doing in therapy, as well as supporting the other people that you're working with. And as I've said countless times before on this podcast, one of the most powerful ways you can do that is by training people in strategies that support executive functioning, as well as knowing how to put the right things in place in your therapy. So I show you exactly how to do that in the School of Clinical Leadership, so you can really be that executive functioning coach for your IEP team. To learn more about the School of Clinical Leadership, go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. Now, let's get back to the interview. I think that what people like to know is that there are people involved that do understand, that have been in their role. And I think the other thing is that, as you said before, recruiting and staffing is a very specific skill set. As we talked about before, there's some people who are really good at it and some people who aren't so good at it. So even if you are a clinician and you want to get into recruiting, then there are some skills that can be learned. But I think that it's a really interesting combination to have both, have that, like you said, 35 years of clinical experience, but also understand the job search process. Because I know that a lot of people, not just SLP, but people in other, social work, psychology, occupational therapy, counseling, special ed teachers, we get trained in our discipline. We don't get trained in our career and how to navigate the job search process. It's just, I remember when I graduated, it was like, oh, most people have a couple job offers when they are, after they graduate. And so it was almost like, well, the job market is so good that we don't really need to help you with that. But the job market has changed. I know that depending on where you live, like in Illinois, there's still a lot of openings. So that's great. But I know there was a shortage for a while on the East Coast, or even just if you want to have options and not just take the things in your area and want to be able to look at just, have a couple different things to pick from. There just wasn't really that support. So I think it's important to know the process.
I'll plug people that have not, like myself, that have never been a speech pathologist. Having an individual like the recruiter that I mentioned that's got years and years of speech hands-on practicing experience and staffing experience, I mean, it's incredibly beneficial. My plug would be, don't count out the folks that have not been clinicians. If you find somebody that's dedicated to learning and dedicated to serving others and dedicated to helping you in your career, they can be equally as beneficial. And the organization I worked at prior to starting Spotter, it was very common for you to move through industries. And out of school, I started in manufacturing, and then I moved to lab and working with folks in labs. And then I moved to architecture and engineering and software. And so I had all these things that I'd never done before. I think if you're committed to learning and finding resources that can support the individual that you're going to hire, then you can still be of great benefit. So a little bit of plug for the folks that haven't been in it, but if you can find resources that have done both, it's hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I found that when I get advice from people who have not been in a clinical role, sometimes you just, like, if you only take advice from this pool of people and you don't get an outside perspective, you don't realize how you're coming across, because there are a lot of times, whether you're looking for a clinical role or whether you want to take your clinical skills and do something else, and you're using language that, all the SLPs use, and nobody uses that outside, you don't realize that people might not know what you're talking about. You might not get hired for something that you're qualified for because you don't have that outside perspective. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that you can certainly gain a benefit from talking to people who can just give you just look at it from a different angle and have a different level of experience.
Yeah, diversity of thought never hurts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly a fan. Like I said, the career coach that I'm working with now has more of a corporate finance marketing background. So again, just completely different background. Or there's, I'm talking to somebody who had a military background and a government background, and there's all different, depending on what you're trying to do, there's all different ways of doing things. So I have, in the job search process, found that it's really interesting when one person says one thing and then you go to another person and it's like, well, that's terrible advice, don't do that. And so my biggest like you said, where there's not one set of magical questions, is that you really do have to learn how to read the room and understand, like, what are all the different pieces of advice that I've gotten and which one of them applies in this conversation that I'm having right now.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of opinions in and around recruiting and job search. A lot of folks have, I mean, you ask 100 people, you could get 100 different opinions on how to approach something. Um, you know, for recruiters, for staffing, I think for managers or leaders in general, I think those that know that there's a lot of opinions, but center it back to what the individual's personal and professional goals are, and I can help them understand options to serve those personal and professional goals. Those are the folks that tend to not only be more successful, but also tend to serve their people at a greater capacity. So, there's a lot of opinions out there. That's for sure. You can get a ton of opinions. I probably do already.
It is a sea of many different pieces of advice, and not, you definitely have to learn how to sift through it. And I think that I think it was, who was it, Gary Vaynerchuk? He was like, every piece of advice taken out of context, or what did he say? Good advice taken out of context is bad advice, including the advice that I'm telling you right now, or something like that. Sure. Where it's like, and I think he's a good example, because so many people take what he says, because he has so much content, that people take it out of context all the time. Not that people don't do that for other people, but I've seen his things that he said be taken different ways. So it was just kind of funny coming from him. But yeah, so I know we've been talking a lot about, what people can do to navigate an employed situation. We've kind of talked a little clinical. We've discussed a little bit about, maybe how you might think about your job search if you're thinking about going to a non-clinical role. But I know that one of your interests is also entrepreneurship, seeing as how you had, you were employed and now you've gone the entrepreneur route. So this could be a whole other side conversation, and I have so many thoughts on it. So when people are thinking about, they're in a role and they're thinking, what else is out there? Do you feel like people have this idea that it's like, this is the like, there's this one scenario that is superior than others? Like, have you kind of gotten that when you've gone through and just learned how to start a business? Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just in certain groups and feeling jaded at the moment, but sure. Do you ever feel like there's this idea of like, this is this scenario is better than this one, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely stereotypes, and I believe human nature, grass is greener. We always wonder if it could be better somewhere else. I mean, of course, as I shared, as you shared, I worked for a larger organization for several years, and there were some really good things that came from that. I don't think one is superior over other. I don't think being a business owner is superior over being a contract employee, regardless of independent or whatever it might be. I don't think it's superior over being a W-2 employee. I think it really depends on what's important to you as an individual. And I ended up where I'm at today after a lot of soul searching. And what's important to me? What do I want to accomplish in my life? What's my why? What's my purpose? And found that through starting Spotter, that I can better serve that purpose. And so I've probably said the phrase personal professional goals a couple of times. I think that's important. I think when individuals are trying to figure out career path, what's important to them, understanding what those are, drives the direction that you should go. And so for me, in the last few years and for the foreseeable future, I feel like I can serve my personal professional goals in a grander way by doing this. And having left a large organization, of course, now I'm talking about just me, but it was really important for me to find a way to make an impact on a greater group of people. And while I knew that I could do that in a role I was in. I felt like I could do that at a greater capacity starting spotter.
Mhm.
And there's a lot, having being self-employed yourself. There's a lot that goes along with that.
Yeah.
There's some really difficult moments and there's some really exciting moments.
Mhm.
That those ebbs and flows that maybe you wouldn't have as drastically if I was a W-2 employee of some
Yeah.
other organization. But again, I think it goes back to what's your purpose? How are you serving it? What's your personal and professional goals? What's your why? What do you want to accomplish in your life? And I think if you follow that, regardless of your title, your employment status, I think you'll find that it's serving you. So I definitely, I've been an employee. We have employees. I certainly don't think there's anything that's superior. I just think it's about whether or not you're serving yourself and ultimately others. So,
Yeah.
so
What
don't. So
things?
I don't know how you're feeling right now. You said
Yeah. Oh
I don't know
man,
how you're feeling, but don't stress
I
out.
think it goes in phases. And what's really interesting is that I think that a lot of people, and I've been sharing this a lot with clinicians where it's like, I think sometimes when people are in one position and they're starting to feel, the itch, like what else is out there, they start to second guess the initial decision that they made, whereas that could have served a purpose and that could have been something that led you to the next step. And so maybe you picked this position, you did it for a while, you got experience, and you want to make some kind of a switch to, maybe a similar role, but just work for a different place, or work in a different clinical setting, or still be in your field, but in a non-clinical role. Or, maybe you do want to start a business. And for SLPs or therapists, the
Yeah.
most common thing is starting a private practice. But I think that sometimes people have this like kind of sunk cost sort of, did I pick the right thing just because maybe it's not exactly what I thought. And the thing is that the whole idea of hindsight, like how would you have known what it was going to be like unless you did it,
Yeah.
unless you had that experience. So I always like to share with people that it's like, you don't know what you don't know, and it's okay to want to try something else. It's okay to not know exactly what you want to do next, but you can move in a direction and try something and get clarity. And that the idea, like I do feel like I had rose colored lenses about the whole entrepreneur space back when I was, a full-time employee. And I'm glad that I went this route, but also there's a lot of things that I've learned where people are like, "Oh, it sounds so great. You can just, when I first started my business, there's like all kinds of courses you can sign up for where it's like drink margaritas on the beach while you're making money in your sleep and like all that stuff that they say." And I'm like, oh, like
Let me know that. Let me know
I
when you
just
figure
can't.
that out.
So I guess I'm just ranting right now. But
Yeah.
so my question for you is like, what things did you think about being self-employed that surprised you or were more challenging, or like, are there things that were unexpected benefits? Like what were things that you didn't expect about going that route?
Yeah. So I was in my professional career for 15 years before I decided to do this. And um, I remember talking to my parents and talking to my sister, of course, my wife about it. And for me, it seemed easy. And I know that's a
Mm-hmm.
goofy thing to say, but to me, it seemed very clear that this is something that I need to do. And again, I go back to my purpose and what I'm trying to accomplish in my life, and making sure that every day I feel like I'm fulfilling my time here, right? Not to be dramatic about it, but I also know that my pace and how I do things may not always be the same as others. Sometimes it's slower, sometimes it's faster, and I
Mm-hmm.
know that typically I'm at optimal, whether you call it performance or optimal impact when I'm managing my own pace. So for me, it became very, very clear that, hey, I want to serve these I want to serve others. If I want to, I want to make the impacts I want to make. If I want achieve these professional goals I have, gosh, I have to do this because otherwise I'm just going to be frustrated with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be more difficult to stay with a different organization at that time. Um, so, I don't know that that's going to be it for everybody. What I have learned, it's no different than, starting a business is no different than starting a new career, stepping into a new setting, deciding to go to your master's program. It's hard work. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you
Yeah.
know that it's hard work. It requires learning, depending on what your goals are. It might require more work, require more learning. So I think it's a little bit of, again, a broken record, but what are you trying to get out of your days, and what are you willing to commit to doing that? Um, what I For any of the speech pathologists that are out there listening, or anybody else that's listening for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what it is that you do, um, pretty much every person that I've met in this space, incredibly hardworking, incredibly high character, incredibly selfless. So, if it's something that's important to you, my bet is that you will probably achieve it. But that jump can be difficult. I imagine that
Yeah.
you felt that at times. That jump to go, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this new setting, or I'm going to try starting my own private practice, or I'm going to check out what a staffing company offers versus a director, whatever it might be. That jump can be a little uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, Exploring it doesn't hurt, and usually you'll know if it feels right. I personally, uh,
Yeah.
so did it feel
Yeah.
right for you? I mean, how did it work for you when you decided to do some of these things? Jesus, podcast is amazing. You got a ton of folks that you've had on, and people I've listened to are far more knowledgeable than I probably will ever be. But I imagine you weren't. Like it had to be difficult for you to step in one day and go, you know what, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. Oh man, it's been a process. So I mean, I think that for for me, I've done a lot of mini experiments, and so that's what I usually recommend for people. And actually, it was when I was interviewing for it was kind of like a curriculum director type of a position, and a lot of times for positions they're like, we want you to have experience in XYZ, and I'm like, how can you get administrative experience if no one will hire you as an
Yeah.
administrator? And he was like, you have to find opportunities to create those experiences. And so I call them micro experiments. So it's like you find ways to create that experience, unofficially. So like for me, like I thought maybe I want to be teaching at the college level. Well, you can find adjunct work. A lot of times people need people to teach adjunct, so you can get some experience that way. And also you can make money doing that. And then also, like, I've created my own courses as a self-employed person. So I have experience designing course curriculum through that way. So there's, you can kind of like do a side hustle, build up some portfolio of experience. Or when I was in the schools, I would, because I wanted to be in a leadership position at some point, I would have my SLP role, but then I would also try to find other ways that I could do other projects. Part of it was because I was getting my director of special ed credential, and I had to do some of that for my coursework. But I would
Sure.
always look for opportunities for those things to kind of do little test runs. And no, it's not exactly the same as being in one of those positions, but that's how you can kind of do these little tests to kind of see, is this a direction I might be wanting to go? And then at some point, you do just have to take the leap. Like, you can only have so many networking calls and ask so many questions before you have to just be like, all right, I've done enough research. I have enough information. I need to just like jump. And in that is kind of hard. But I'm definitely a proponent for research and preparation and doing little mini experiments and trying to get information about what your next step might be. And I think that this is something that I struggle with, where sometimes people, it's not that they don't have options or things that they're interested in, it's that they have so many that they can't narrow them. like
Yeah.
the bright shiny object syndrome, where it's like so many different things, just pick a direction and go.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that the other directions weren't good directions. It's not like a magical karmic thing. It's just a choice.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it as well.
I don't know if you ever run into this, you can't always do everything.
Yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many things I'd love to accomplish in my life and accomplish
Yeah.
with my daughter. And I wish I could do them all today, but the reality is that's not possible. And so, what is it that's most important to you? And to your point, um, there's so many things out there. Grass is greener always. I just think that's human nature, that people are
Mm-hmm.
see the shiny ball type thing and wonder if it and chase it and wonder if it's better. But I think if you can come back to where am I trying to go with my life, my family, my career, and how is this serving me and those priorities, maybe takes away a little bit of the noise at times.
Yeah. I was talking to a guy the other day that he's in a corporate role, and he's one of those people. He's like, I always get the itch after a couple of years. And in corporate positions, people do bounce around a lot more than in clinical positions. It's kind of normal. Or it's a little bit more normal than in the schools. And he said that he makes a habit of just interviewing for something new once a year, and a lot of times he doesn't take it. So it would be interesting if, even if people in a clinical role in the schools had that same mindset of like, maybe you aren't super actively looking for a new position, but just making it a habit to continue to network as if you're job seeking and just see what else is out there, even if you're not, it's almost like, don't go to the grocery store when you're starving, do some preparation beforehand. Like, maybe we should think about our job search the same way, where it's, what if we always were sort of in job search mode, even if we weren't just, because you don't want to wait till you're in a position to where you're in a situation that's so toxic that you have to get out of it and you're just like, miserable all the time, just being proactive about it.
Yeah. I had that,
Yeah.
I was that.
Yeah.
Um, I had a hard time making that decision until it became so clear that if I did make the decision, it just wasn't going to be healthy, right?
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend not doing that.
It's hard to motivate yourself to do that, though.
Well, for me, I think it's a relationship thing, and when I was at that point, I struggled abandoning. Really, I felt like I was going to abandon relationships, people that counted on me, that I'd worked with for years. Like, what were they going to think? Was I going to leave them in a bad spot? However, generally, I think people want good for other folks. Obviously, there's all negativity all over the news most of the days, but generally, I think people want the best for other folks. And going through that experience, I think I didn't realize it at the time until you had to make that decision, or I was in the spot where I was like, God, it's gone too far. So I would agree with you. I think exploring many experiments, how do you give yourself perspective? I don't think it hurts. That's for sure.
Yeah. I know that, and again, this is like hindsight, but I definitely wish I would have dabbled more in the self-employment realm earlier than I did, but you don't know what you don't know, I mean, I was getting my doctorate. It's not like I was slouching around. So
I can only again speak for me, but I think the self-employment thing, I think the fear that sometimes can come along with it is if it doesn't work out, what does that look like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know I have that. If I don't, if I'm not successful with Spotter, what does that mean for me with my identity? That I fail,
Oh, yeah.
And that's a scary thing to confront, failure. And obviously, we all have moments of failure, but I don't know if it's as extreme for me as if it's as extreme being in other positions. But again, that also, for me, that's a driver, that's a motivator, that's a pusher to do more. So
yeah.
But
Well, I think with the self-employed thing, depending on what you do, I mean, people, you can try that out when you still have a job. I mean, as long as there's not, and I know I wanted to get a little bit more today. I know we've been talking for a while now. We're over our time. So, but I know one of the things that I did want to know is to kind of circle back to what we were talking about before, because I mean, maybe people want to look for a job that's also going to, what if people want a hybrid situation where they want to be part-time self-employed or have some side projects, but also have a job and have some security? Like that's a good option for people as well. You don't always have to put yourself into one bucket. Sometimes you might for a certain period of time and then you switch, or sometimes you might have kind of a combination. So I know that you mentioned some things that come up with staffing as far as like non-competes and things like that. So what are some things as we kind of wrap up here that you think are different about the way that you handle recruiting at Spotter versus what you've seen in the industry in the past?
Yeah. So from a agreement perspective, Spotter does not have non-competes. We don't have binding language in our agreements. We don't have buyout clauses. So, when we work with a school, when a school calls us, we understand what they're looking for, understand the school, the culture, all that kind of stuff that we talked about earlier. And we help an individual find that. It's that connector, right? So if somebody decides that they want to be part of a district, then that's what we are. We're a connector. If somebody wants to be part of Spotter long term, they have that opportunity. But we've taken away those limitations. The term contract to hire is very, very common in pretty much every other industry that's out there. It's not as common in schools. And we got into this for the people and to change how staffing companies partner with schools. There's no reason contract to hire can't be commonplace with schools. So if an individual is going to go engage with a recruiter, I would very much understand what those agreements look like, what their limitations are, what opportunities they have. And I think that would be for any position you're going to get, but particularly with staffing, you mentioned flexibility. We offer that because we don't have those things. We offer that. And, we have plenty of people that work 0.5s or 0.6s or 0.4s. And, the schools a lot of times would love the help full time, but, it's a highly in demand position. So oftentimes you can be more flexible. You might get a hybrid position. You might get a work from home position. You might be able to do part-time so that you can serve other interests. That would be probably the biggest thing from a tactical agreement, legal perspective. Personally, I think if it ever gets to that point, there's a really big miss. If I have an employee that gets too legal, something went wrong.
Yeah.
Something went really wrong. Our recruiters, the staff that are working with folks, their number one priority, it's certainly to help kids, but it's first and foremost, how do we understand what's important to the speech pathologist or the therapist that we're working with, and how do we make sure we serve that? And I think, those things change. So we need to continually understand what that looks like and make sure that we're helping folks accomplish, what they're looking to do. If we are doing that, how would people not be happy in their role? If we're helping people achieve what they want to in their career and in their personal life, how would they not be happy? And are we perfect at it? No, nobody is. But we spend a lot of time talking about, what's this person's interest? Why are they doing what they do? What do they want to accomplish in the next year? What do they want to accomplish in the next 5 years? And there's been plenty of opportunities where we've made introductions outside of Spotter because we know it's not the right fit for us at the time. So I think that, again, any hiring manager, recruiter, leader, regardless of the space, I think if they're prioritizing their people, then probably got a pretty good opportunity.
Yeah. So really that's really interesting that the contract to hire thing is common in other industries where you could, in theory, be working for the staffing company, but then eventually, like you really like the district and you want to go work for the district. So that's how that would look. And is that not often done in other companies that staff for schools?
We're working on that.
Yeah.
The more success we have, the more pressure I think it puts on other staffing companies to consider.
Yeah.
It gives more leverage for the schools to have those conversations. But no, it's not as common. I mean, I worked for the largest privately held staffing company in the U.S. It was third in the world at the time I was there. I don't know what it's at now, but they offered contract to hire and direct placement, and pretty much every competitor that we had did the same. And that was across manufacturing, scientific, architecture, energy, engineering, software, IT. And so if all of those industries can do it, why can't that be offered in schools? And
it's really weird.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
have opinions on it that might be maybe better we discuss that outside.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I just think it's an opportunity for our part of the staffing industry to consider, if if that's a direction to go, and I don't see why it isn't. We've been doing it for 4.5 years. We every year have people that have converted, and it continues to grow. We certainly have people that want to stay on the spotter, and some that go start their own companies or go into a different setting, and that's sick as well. But we get really excited when people convert. It's a win knowing that we help them achieve what they are trying to accomplish in their career, and it's also a win because again we're trying to change how staffing companies partner with schools, and we don't want that feeling of or that thought of what we started the conversation with, where people maybe are more skeptical or have an ill feeling towards something. We want that to go away. We want to be partners. We want to help these schools and help these clinicians achieve their goals. And ultimately, all of us are working to serve those kids or serve those patients or serve those individuals that you guys are seeing every day. So, yes, it's everywhere else.
Interesting. What about the part-time? Because so it's really funny because when I was, even though I don't feel like I got a lot of career coaching early on in my life, what I did hear was that being a therapist is something that's easy to do part-time. And that's kind of the sell about being an SLP, and I think could be potentially true for other therapies. So is that whole idea of being, 0.5, is that something that's done in other industries too? Or other staffing companies that staff for schools? So
other industries completely away from
I'm curious if there are other staffing, if it's different in other companies that are working with this particular industry as well as just other industries in general.
So my experience with schools, with individuals that are in a speech role or a speech profession or in a therapy profession, I think it's more common. You certainly see positions posted for 0.8 or 0.5 or 0.6 or whatever it might be in the schools. And I think oftentimes schools are looking for people full time, but they have, they understand the market, so they'll be a little bit more flexible. You of course see stuff like PRN and that are able to go pick up shifts at hospitals or whatever it might be. So I think there's a lot of flexibility in this space. In staffing in general, hiring in general, employment in general, I think you're seeing more of it. The whole gig work thing that's now very, very popular. People going on apps and picking up a few hours or a project or whatever it might be. So I think it's becoming more common. But full-time employment is still that's what people when they're hiring tend to ask for. Right? More often than not, they're looking for a full-time employee. They just are thinking more about how they can accomplish the goals of the school or the goals of the organization, and so they're flexible.
And I get that, we've really focused on the benefits from the job seeker end, but obviously this has to be a win for the person doing the hiring as well. Otherwise it doesn't work if it's not a win for everybody. So I understand that sometimes you need what you need, and you want to make sure that you have your team, because it's not beneficial to the other people working there if you don't have a full team. So
yeah, you got it. Yeah. Um, yeah, more important than ever for you to know what's important to you. So when you go to ask for those things, you can be very clear about them, because oftentimes, we work with schools, right? So that's where my greatest knowledge is from. They have some level of flexibility, but they can't be flexible on everything, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Because they still are trying to accomplish goals.
Yeah.
Certain kids. So.
Well, I feel like we could just keep going, but I know we're over time. So where can people go to learn more about Spotter? I know you have your contact if people are interested in looking at positions, but also you have some resources on your website where people can learn about your company, or there's just some other free information on there, I believe.
Yeah, spotterstaffing.com is our website. Certainly go on there. If you're looking for a position, you can certainly go out there and look for a position. Our recruiter profiles, everybody's profiles on there. So if you want to learn more about that, that'll be a great place to go. We tend to be a lot on LinkedIn, tend to be a lot on Twitter and other social media outlets. My Twitter handle is Ryan_Cleaveland, so you can certainly follow me there. LinkedIn, Ryan Cleaveland. If you follow #join the herd, we didn't talk about Leo the llama, but you'll see a lot of llama stuff with Spotter. So #join the herd. If anybody had any questions, want to talk more, share perspective, thoughts, I'd love hearing it. My email is ryanc@spotterstaffing.com.
Great.
You can go on there. There's blogs, there's content. We tend to share discounts for CEUs with other organizations, free CEUs. So try to get as much out there to the community that serves the community as possible.
And right now you are staffing for Texas and Illinois, correct?
Yeah. So it's important to us that we do our best job possible. So we spend time in kind of like a 75, 80 mile radius around Chicago and Illinois, and then the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So if that's your world, or if you want to learn more about that world, that would be something we could help you with.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Karen. It's nice talking with you. Nice to talk with somebody else from Illinois State.
Yeah, exactly. Be sure to check the show notes and learn more about where you can connect with Ryan and learn about Spotter staffing, especially if you are in the Illinois or Texas area and you're looking for a position. Also, if you want to learn more about the School of Clinical Leadership, my course that helps school clinicians take the executive functioning lead in their building, but also will help you get better at networking and selling yourself. Check out the sign-up page at drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. As always, if you have a suggestion for a guest on the show, or if you'd like to be a guest, please email me at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who needs this information. And as always, it helps me so much if you leave me a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you next time.